Welcome to another episode of Rose Resource Room. Today I am here with Trent. Trent, welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
My pleasure having you. So, tell me a little bit about yourself and your journey to homeschooling.
Yeah, so I grew up in southwestern Missouri. Currently, I'm 25, so I'm still a pretty young guy, but I was homeschooled from the get-go. I had a pretty unique upbringing in homeschooling in that my parents were kind of the rebels of the family and that they went in the homeschooling direction.
Yeah.
So most of my family's from California, but they had decided to kind of get out of California a little bit early, move to Missouri where they raised me and my older brother. So I got to start out and do homeschooling all the way through. I primarily worked through classical conversations up until I graduated. And then I started working with the program that I'm now employed by called Unbound, where I work as an admissions counselor.
Awesome. So, tell me about what was that journey being homeschooled, especially where your family was a trailblazer?
Mhm. So it was very cool, personally, because, I grew up in the 2000s, and so it was at that point where homeschooling was just becoming a pretty solidified cultural institution,
Okay.
especially where I was from. Homeschooling was still pretty common, and so I had a lot of peers,
Okay.
but with still that interesting phenomenon where I could run around, and every once in a while you bump into people who are like, "Oh, you're those people," right? And then you can kind of bridge that gap pretty quickly by demonstrating, hey, we're not socially awkward. We're actually perfectly fine, well-adjusted people who are a lot of times ahead of the curve. But even like just as I've entered into young adulthood, it's been one of those things where I already knew growing up that being homeschooled was something special. It was something that was going to be to my benefit in the long run. But as I've kind of rounded that corner, I've started to really see how that's benefited me in the real world and see where the rest of my generation has gone and where I've been able to go instead. That's been really cool to kind of see those unique advantages, see the quality of education that I got, see the fact that this idea of socialization within traditional education is pretty antiquated because I heard this just like last week and I think it was pretty poignant. We talk about socializing kids by putting them in a box school where they're only going to be with people who are of their same age level. And that never happens after you turn like 18. Like once you graduate college, that never happens ever again. And so really it's socializing, but it's a different kind of socializing that's actually not conducive to long-term social health. And homeschooling that is actually more intergenerationally reliant is much more helpful.
That's such an interesting concept. I literally said that to someone last week. I said, you put all these kids together, plus or minus 3 months in age difference, and you say, okay, this is what socialization looks like. And then you get out into the real world, and you never have a boss who's like 3 months older than you. You never know if your boss is going to be older or younger. You start working with people of different ages, different generations, and that is the real world. So when I take my kids out to the bank or the supermarket during the middle of the day, or to the library and they have to go and actually speak to someone who is not their age plus or minus 3 months, that's actually what the real world looked like. So it's so interesting that you're having that conversation. What I find even more interesting is that myth about socialization that it still hangs on. Like
Mhm.
years and generations later, we're still hanging on to that. Oh, aren't you concerned about socialization? Actually, yes, that's why we're homeschooling.
Yeah, exactly. And it's even kind of taken a next evolution here where it's even the socialization language is still there, but it's even now more so kind of like turned to experience.
Mm,
And I see that a lot more because the field I work in is in higher education. And so you hear that a lot of the time when people are talking about why they still go to college in some cases.
yeah.
A lot of it is, I had that experience. It's kind of the way that it's done. I don't want my kids to miss out on this experience. And so there's still this idea that floats out there that by not going the traditional route, you're missing out on something, or there's something that's unique to be
Mm,
had there. When really, I find the irony of that being that homeschooling is really actually the way it's been done for all of human history, except for the last, 50, 60 years, really, when it
yeah.
truly took hold. So not missing out on much. So,
No, that's a really good point. And another piece with the experiences of sports. Like, oh, I played sports. I need my kids to play sports. And I'm like, how did that work out for you? Because I don't see you on any major team, right? Like, so it's not to
yeah.
say that kids shouldn't be enrolled in sports or that kids shouldn't be allowed to play in sports at different academic institutions. But I feel like we always find this one thing to hold on to say that they're missing out or they're not going to be enough. And it's really a poor mindset. So One of the things you mentioned earlier is that you've actually seen the benefits of homeschooling. You talked about the quality education, and obviously, just with your presentation, we can see that there's some definitely classical conversations. You did that speech every week, right? Like we're seeing
Mhm.
all that. But what are some other benefits or advantages that you can speak to? And then specifically, you talked about being able to compare your peers. Like you have a real survey, like a real research study in real
Mhm.
life.
Yeah, for sure. So, honestly, one of the biggest ones is, like you mentioned, being able to speak and just a lot of times the language that I use. One of the reasons I find that funny is that CC, of course, relies on Latin a lot. I
Yeah.
hated Latin when I did it, but now, kind of retroactively, it's like, wow, I actually think about language in a whole different way because of that. But
Mm,
even beyond that, there is an autodidactism that I've been able to pick up through homeschooling. So being able to be self-taught, a desire to continually learn, that I do not see reflected in a lot of young adults today who are either of my generation or just a little bit younger, just a little bit older,
hmm
where because they're so used to being fed information and being taught what to learn and where to learn it and what time to learn it and how to learn it, they then don't really have an interest in going out and picking up new skills or new ideas on their own. Whereas I've actually found it to be quite the opposite, that I enjoyed my traditional education, but in the interim since I finished high school and now, I've probably actually learned more because now I can just go on and pursue the things that I'm truly interested in that really blend with my personality. And that's something that you just don't see happen anymore. There's this kind of stopping and learning that happens when people graduate high school or college. And really, it should be the other way around, where that's just building the foundation so you can then delve into
mm.
the things that you really want to learn later in life. And that was something that I was really, really fortunate to be able to set up to do more appropriately.
I love that. As a mom of young children, I have a 10-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 2-year-old. So we're started all the way over.
Ah.
And we also do CC. So sometimes I'm like, really? Do I really need to do the sentence diagram? And when are they ever going to use it? And it's never the thing that you're doing, it's what it exposes them to, right? Like you just mentioned how you think about things differently. You have like a different approach to language. And I really appreciate that. That's reassuring for me that, what we're doing is not in vain. And even on the Latin side, there are tons of benefits. Like English has maybe 60% Latin. And then if you become a lawyer or in the medical profession, there's a lot of Latin, but just like understanding maybe 4 or 5 languages, because Latin is the father of, the Romance languages, even those benefits are there. But I just think it's always great to see someone in the flesh who has walked through an experience and you're like, look, there's living proof that these things work. Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah, for sure, of course. And for all of the kids out there who are currently persevering through Latin, whether it's CC or otherwise, one of the best ways that I can kind of explain what it has done for me is that most people think about language and they think about one word translates to one meaning, right? But when you start breaking down things like Latin and all of its grammatical intricacies, and also when you pair that with doing something like IEW, so you're also getting the
Yeah.
English side of it, you start to think of words more so as individual components that are being assembled that all have smaller meanings that then build a bigger meaning. And that broadens out your vocabulary exponentially. It also makes it easier for you to grasp what somebody's saying when they're using a word that you have not heard before, because you can kind of break it apart. It's like, okay, this root means
Yeah.
this and this means that, and then you can kind of reverse engineer it from there. And it just reformats the way their brain thinks about language, and it makes it much more eloquent, much more effective person in communication in that way. So even if you're not planning to be reading Caesar's Gallic Wars for the rest of your life, that is still something that you'll be able to take away. Even if you don't remember a lot of Latin, it just trains that brain pattern in a different way.
Beautiful. So there you have it, moms and dads. Stick with it. There is hope at the end of all this.
Exactly.
So question for you. You said you're with Unbound. What was that journey like? How did you know you wanted to work there? How did that opportunity open up?
Yeah, so a lot of it was kind of personality fit, time fit, and also I had an older brother who did it. So all three of those things made a pretty good segue. So what Unbound is a young adult training program. When I first got involved with it, it was more so on the get through college quick and cheap side of things. So, late 2010s, as homeschoolers, we're all pretty skeptical of college institutions still. And so it was, hey, let's just bypass the system. Let's use online college and clap testing and all this to get you as many credits as possible so you can just skip it. And coming out of CC, that was appealing to me. And then I took a few courses, like about a semester worth, realized that I already knew knew everything they were trying to teach me. I was spending thousands of dollars on this. And I'm like, yeah, nope, I'm done with college.
Wow.
And right about that same time, Unbound underwent a really cool transition where instead of being the get through college quick and cheap scheme, it turned into, okay, what if we just rebuilt college and did it in a way that is designed to actually recreate what the institution was designed to do back in the day, but has moved
Mhm.
away from, which is that training of young adults, preparing you with actual practical life skills, and then launching you into the real world where you're not having all this just theoretical data that's been plugged into your brain. You actually have the actionable skill sets you want to go and execute on. And I got to be a part of kind of that transition within Unbound, where I was not quite the guinea pig because there were people who had already gone through this before me. But as they were making this transition, I got to be a part of it because I was a part of some of the student leadership teams.
Mhm.
And so that's where a lot of Unbound's training mindset has actually been built, is through the practical experience of the student leaders who work directly with the staff. And so I was in that portion where, it's kind of a little trial and error, figuring out what works, what doesn't, what we can then teach to the other students. And from there, I worked on planning two national student events. One of them ended up getting canceled because of COVID, because 2020 was a
Oh.
thing. But that was fun. It was a good learning, a good lesson in adversity and then how you pivot
Pivot
and
in.
plan
Yeah.
something else. And thankfully, the rest of my cohort and the team at Unbound liked me enough to then offer me a position afterwards. So I finished up my time as a student and then moved to working directly on staff.
Wow. So much to unpack. I love when you talked about what they're doing right now is what education, that institution was originally designed to do. Because before I understood what classical education was, I kept saying to my husband, I just want something, and I kept describing it, not knowing that there was an actual term for it. So I think it's beautiful that someone has taken this concept and said, we want people to actually think. Critical thinking is a critical component, right? Versus, just feeding people things and then having them regurgitate. So I think it's beautiful that it's not only the piece of the learning and teaching them how to love learning, but also the character development and the personality. So I think that's beautiful.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely.
So tell me, what will you be talking about at CHAP?
Yeah, so the session I'm going to be doing is called Failing Forward, and it's one of my favorite ones to kind of build and mess around with because this is something we notice pretty uniquely among high schoolers and students who are moving into that post high school age. But there's a lot of this sense that failure is this thing that does irreparable damage to you as a human being, and therefore it needs to be avoided at all costs.
Mm,
And in homeschool circles, that tends to show up as kind of this sense of perfectionism and then all of the troubles that come along with that. And then in the rest of the culture, it turns into idleness, where it's not so much perfectionism as it is just kind of this paralysis and this fear to do anything because of the potential of failure. And I've developed the perspective that current paradigm is built on a lot of secular thought that has kind of progressed since the beginning of the secular revolution. I follow a lot of the chains of thought laid out by Carl Trueman in his book, The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. And when we apply some of those secular paradigms to the ways that we think about things like resilience and we think about hope and the fact that you need to be able to fail to some degree while learning new skills, it completely shifts everything on its head and gives you a new perspective that allows you to think of failure not as something that you want to pursue, but something that you can actively encounter and actively use to your benefit, and that will be used to your benefit if you look at it through the right lens.
very, very interesting. So one of the things that stuck out to me is when you talked about the perfectionism. Um, so I do productivity coaching, and what it really means is you have a project, you need an accountability bully or buddy, whatever you want to call it,
Mhm.
and I just make sure that you get the stuff done. But in it, I have to do a lot of mindset coaching. And what I realize is procrastination is also a form of that perfectionism because if you can't do it right, then you're just not doing it, or there's busy work. And I was talking to my client on Monday, and she was saying how she said something and then I called it out right away. And she was like, oh, Ro, yes, you did talk to me about this before. But I've had people say to me, oh, I want to lose 10 pounds. And I said, okay, so what are the steps? What do we need to do? And the busy work that they do is they buy all the equipment, they buy all the clothes, they do the research for like 10 years on what gym they want to sign up for, but they never actually get to the thing. And a lot of it
Yeah.
is that fear of failure, right? So I think that whole concept of fail forward and fail in fast is actually very brilliant because so many times we think, if we just skip over the failing piece, then we'll get to the success, not realizing you can get to that success much faster. There's a quote that I'm completely going to butcher, but it's something to the effect of, I never failed or I never did it wrong. I just found 200 different ways to do it, right? So,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
then there's some detergent, I don't know what it's called, 504 or something, but that's how many formulas they had before they got it right. And I'm like,
Mhm.
I don't know if I tried 500 times, but there's
Yeah.
something to the success that comes from that, right?
Absolutely. And one of the things that I think is most fascinating here is applying that exact train of thoughts to young
Hmm.
adults who are trying to figure out what they want to do in life. Because
Right.
that's where we see this being the most poignant is in kind of reframing this into the college perspective here. You have so many kids who are graduating high school and they're being told that you have to choose your degree path now.
Right.
And that degree path is going to lock you into a trajectory that you're going to be stuck with the rest of your life. And that kid's sitting there thinking, okay, I've never really made major decisions to this point, and now I'm being
Mhm.
asked to choose what I'm going to do for all of this time. And I also have an incredible array of options here. And
Mhm.
if I choose the wrong one, I'm the only one to blame, and I'm stuck with that
Mm.
forever. And so that turns into exactly what you're saying, kind of that perfectionism where, okay, I really need to get the right one. And if I can't figure out how to get the right one, I'm just going to kind of stop. And
Yep.
you see a lot of
Analysis
kids getting
paralysis.
stuck. Hmm. And that's first thing that's of course damaging, but then it robs students of the ability to go out and just say, hey, I want to go out and just try a bunch of different things. And as you
Mhm.
try different things and as you learn from those experiences, not only do you learn what you're good at, but you learn what you like doing. And of course that means trying about 1,000 different things that you're not going to do in the long term, or things that you thought were going to be a long-term project, but of course didn't work out, and then pivoting over and over again until you figure out what that actual real thing is. And what I find even more fascinating about that is that's a pattern that we see young adults needing to perfect. But we don't realize is that that is what the broader marketplace is doing now more than ever before. Because we live in an age where technology is so rapidly advancing, what the marketplace needs and expects of people is changing faster than it ever has before.
Right.
So even if you did come out of, college with a pretty strict trajectory, I mean, how many people's jobs looks the same now, 10 years after they started it, or even just within the last 5 years,
Right.
even just since, COVID specifically, the way that we work, the way that we think, the way that we approach things, it's all moving very quickly. And so being able to adapt to that quickly and to embrace that failing forward process is not just essential for getting started anymore. It's essential for actually being able to keep going in the long run.
Right. And if you learn anything from COVID, it's tweak, tweak, pivot. You have to be innovative. You have to be flexible. You have to be able to just tweak on the go. Everything you're saying is like literally my lifestyle. I have friends who they're like, I want to be an accountant. I'm going to study accountant. I'm going to be an accountant. And they did just that. I have friends who are like, I want to study law. And they did that. And now they're lawyers. I also have friends who are lawyers and wish they didn't become lawyers, but that's another
Mm-hmm.
story. Whereas for
Yeah.
me, I was always either like on the liberal arts side or like I'm not quite sure what I want to do. And unfortunately, we don't stress internships enough. So you tell a 16-year-old or 20-year-old or whatever, you need to figure out what you want to do until you retire. And they're like, are you serious? So for me,
Mm-hmm.
I ended up doing my master's in corporate communications. And I don't think I've ever had a corporate communications job with
Yeah.
that specific title. But fast forward, I've worked in human resources, I've worked in education, I've worked in consulting, so many different fields. But now in my coaching business, I work with all these different professionals that all my different experiences help me to align with. So if I'm
Mm-hmm.
talking to a doctor who's complaining about benefits, I used to work in benefits. If I'm talking to someone who's sharing an experience about something else, I can resonate with that. So I feel like there's something to be said about not having this linear path where it's just like, this is what I want to do and this is the degree, but having that exposure. And the last thing I'll say is I have young children who I cannot train them for let me teach them everything just in case because some of these jobs are not even created yet. Like I'm
Mm-hmm.
literally raising
Yeah.
kids who in 10, 20 years, they're going to have jobs that I wouldn't have even thought of. When I did corporate
Mm-hmm.
communications, I didn't study social media because we weren't doing social media yet.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, kind of rounding this all the way back to where we started with classical education,
Yeah,
it's the whole idea that it's about building up a way of thinking, not just teaching you what to think.
that's
And
right.
in unbound parlance, kind of the term that we like to use is that the goal is to train you to quickly and effectively master complicated information. Because that's the thing that going out into the workforce, going out into the real world, that you're going to be doing over and over and over again. And the skill sets you have are never enough. It's always about being able to learn the next thing and figure out what the
Right.
next thing is before the next thing happens. And so much of the time, that's about learning to ask the right question about the nature of the problem that you're encountering, be autodidactic enough to go out and then solve, find the answers to those questions, and then to actually apply it in real time and to do so faster than everybody else. And of course, homeschooling is much more equipped to train young adults to think that way than pretty much anything else is.
Absolutely. And I just found the quote. It's from Thomas Edison, and it says, I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work. So
Hey.
who definitely needs to fail forward and fail fast as we're doing it. So, Trent, if you could tell the listeners anything, or if there was something that you wish you had done differently, what would that be?
Ooh, that's a tough one here.
It's a big one, I know.
Yeah, I think if I could say anything, this is maybe a little bit of a left curve on kind of the conversation here. But when I was, I'm still pretty young, so I've got a pretty recent memory of going through this whole process of figuring out what I was going to be, what I was going to do, who am today. It's very tempting to set your fixture upon this solid identity or meaning that you create when you're a teenager, and then to kind of put all of your chips in that one direction and try and pursue that with everything that you've got, and then to be really demoralized when that thing doesn't work out. Because for 99% of that thing that you figured out in high school that you want to do is not going to be the long term thing. And so embracing the fact that, yeah, failure is, of course, an iterative process and that you have a meaning and identity that is, in fact, much greater than that because you're most likely, if you're homeschooled, coming from a Christian background, and therefore
Yep.
you have this given meaning and purpose to your life that you can chase after. Pairing that and the concept of failing forward together is the thing that is really powerful and allows you to get over those big failures and to get that more concerted direction in the long run.
Wow. Mic drop. Love it. So there you have it. Failure is not your identity, right? It's not
Exactly.
you. So that was amazing. Trent, thank you so, so much for your time today. I look forward to seeing you in Pennsylvania in June at the CHAP conference.
Yeah, of course. Thanks a lot for having me on, Ro.
My pleasure.